Today, we will have Josh, Director of Market Analytics with San Diego and CoStar, giving us a great snapshot of where our market is today in all sectors: retail, office, industrial, apartments. Please give Josh a warm welcome and thank him for being here.
Thanks a lot, Chris. We should probably update my headshot at some point. Anyway, I'm Josh Hull. I'm the Director of Market Analytics over at the CoStar Group. I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so giving everybody about a 25,000-foot view of what's happening right now in the commercial sector in San Diego. And here's sort of what our agenda is going to look like really quickly. We're going to start with apartments. Then we're going to move into office, retail, industrial, and then we'll wrap up just looking at some of the numbers on the sales side. And again, we're not going to get too much into the nitty-gritty just because of time constraints, but I'll give you an idea of some takeaways that we all can leave here with today. So with apartments, let's start with one of the things that's driving a lot of the high values that we're seeing in home prices, job growth, commercial activity. It's this chart right here. It's venture capital that's pouring into San Diego. Last year was a record high. Probably all told about $8.5 billion in investment. We're getting a lot of local companies that are pulling in funding rounds over $100 million, and what that's doing to companies, it's allowing them to expand. Companies are signing very large commercial leases right now for space that they don't even need, just assuming down the road that they're going to need enough employees to fill out that space. You're seeing companies go from 10,000 square feet to 80,000 square feet, 50,000 square feet to 250,000 square feet, and a lot of it's because of this funding right here. And it's one of the reasons that makes San Diego largely one of the primary life science markets, if you will, in the entire country behind Boston and the Bay Area. But on the multifamily side, this chart, hopefully everybody can read it. We're just in a sort of a level of unprecedented demand right now, right? Vacancies across the entire county are about 2.1%. The stabilized rate's down at about 1.6%. Pretty much anywhere you look across the county, and this is just looking at submarkets from Chula Vista in South County to North County, Escondido, La Jolla, UTC. And we're looking at the blue bar here is just looking at essentially net absorption, demand, the amount of units that have been absorbed in the past 12 months. And the orange bar is just looking at a 5-year average. And you can see the last year is largely doubling. Wherever you look, demand has doubled over the past year across San Diego and pretty much everywhere across the county. And you can go down to downtown San Diego where there's tons of apartment development going on. You just have huge demand. The vacancy rate's fallen below 10% for the first time in about a decade, and we're in the longest sustained run of sub 10% vacancy in downtown in over 15 years, just because people are just flocking to new apartment units right down there. And this is one of the reasons, too, that, the result of that demand is what we're looking at here. We're looking at daily asking rents. We get about 45,000 rental observations on apartment units in San Diego every single day at CoStar. And it just gives us great insight into what's happening on the market rent side. And you can see 2019, 2020, we're generally about 3.5%, our usual typical, annual jump in rents. Last year was more of the anomalous, just because of the nature of COVID, and you could see rents dove a little bit there when the shutdown orders hit last year, but this past year, 2021, was sort of unprecedented. We did over 13% rent growth, and we're starting to see it slow down a little bit there in the fourth quarter. Part of that's probably seasonality, part of it's more of a moderation just because we can't maintain that breakneck speed of rent growth. So 2022 is one to watch. It's not to say rents are going to fall, but we're probably not going to be at that 13% level. We're probably going to be closer to 7% level, which is still a really strong number. Moving there, we're going to go into office, which has had its challenges, to say the least, over the course of the past 2 years, largely because we're unlikely to have a linear recovery, and also because we have this hybrid approach to office using space right now, which Jamal is probably going to do a great job on when we talk about it on our panel. But just there's sort of no one-size-fits-all on the office market side right now, and that's leading to sort of just a lot of fuzziness in the data. What's going to happen? We constantly read news about companies that are just taking the wait-and-see approach, returning to the office in full. So a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of us here in this room too, are still working from home. The good sign from the office market, though, this is just looking at leasing activity year over year. The good news is we had one of the strongest years of leasing in about 15 years on the office side, 7.5 million square feet of leases. A lot of that's been driven by biotech companies that are leasing office space outfitted with laboratory requirements, they accounted for almost 20% of total leasing volume in 2021. And that's obviously a sharp uptick from what we saw in 2020, just based on, a lot of firms just weren't comfortable making long-term decisions in 2020 and a large part the first half of 2021. But now we're sort of seeing what the landscape is going to look like going forward. So, a lot of these companies, Apple is expanding everywhere up here in UTC and Rancho Bernardo, and then you just have biotech firms branching out into Sorrento Mesa, Torrey Pines, UTC, the 56 corridor in Del Mar Heights and Carmel Valley is where the huge demand on the office space is going right now. One of the challenges, though, that we look on the office side is this chart right here. It's the amount of available space and the percent of inventory that's available. This is something to keep an eye on as we look at office metrics, just because that's a lot of available space, and a lot of that's coming from the speculative development that's underway, along the 56 corridor and downtown, where there's just tons of spec space, right? The campus at Horton, the RAD development, we had 2100 Kettner that just delivered. A lot of the space is breaking ground with no commitments in place, which is sort of different than we've had in the past. A lot of companies wanted to have maybe 30, 40, 50% pre-leasing, like we saw at One Paseo. They broke ground up 45% pre-leased when that broke ground up in the Del Mar Heights area. No more. A lot of companies are just breaking ground with zero space and hoping that they can get tenants by the time they deliver. One of the other things that's weighing on the office side is sublet space. The good news is it looks like that tidal wave of available sublet space that hit the market is behind us. It looks like it peaked at the end of 2020. We're slowly falling here through the 2021. We still are about 10% more available office space than we had prior to the pandemic, which is something to keep an eye on. The other thing with sublet space, it's not just that it's competitive, on more space on the market, but it's also the amount of what they're charging on those rents. Across San Diego as a whole, office space on the sublet side rents for about an 8% discount relative to relet space. You go to downtown Sorrento Mesa, UTC, that delta is about 25%. So you can see the challenge for landlords that are dealing with having to compete with sublet space in their market. The retail side is sort of just kind of crazy right now, isn't it? I mean, being a retailer in this environment and coming out of it with the COVID restrictions being lifted 2 quarters ago is a welcome sign to anybody that has to do any business planning. But there's sort of been a secular change on the retail side, and that's a result of e-commerce, right? You sort of have to have that e-commerce platform to complement your brick and mortar platform. The good news is 2021 had a lot fewer store bankruptcies than we had in 2020. In fact, we had the lowest level in 5 years. That's good news. There's a little bit more stability. The thing that we're seeing on the retail side, we look at all the property types here, vacancies are falling, but one of the things that's sort of the change that we've had in the past is that the amount of space that retailers are leasing is smaller by about 15 to 20% than it was in the past 10 years. Companies are taking smaller footprints, because of that sort of that complementary style between e-commerce and brick and mortar. People still want to touch their goods. They want to look at it before ordering it, but you don't necessarily need to have 80,000 square feet if you're a Burlington Coat Factory. Maybe you can take 40,000 square feet. And that's one of the reasons, too, that we're seeing smaller leases on that side. One of the things that's also likely going to help the retail sector, too, to mitigate the higher vacancies that we have seen as a result of the pandemic, is I think we're going to start seeing repurposing of some of that dark retail space, particularly the anchors, the big boxes, into perhaps housing. That's a great way to help the supply side on the apartment side, which we are, which when we listened to earlier, is we are serial undersupplied, and it doesn't really matter what California's legislature does. It's going to be difficult to bring more supply to market. But when's the last time anybody complained about an apartment building going up in a mall? Nobody complains about it, right? You look at UTC when they built Palisade over there, they built 300 apartment units. There's neighborhood opposition to largely everything, but nobody really cared that 300 apartments were being built there. Do you really care if there's more mall shoppers going in and out of that mall, or if those are apartment renters going in and out of that mall? It's less of a concern on that side, so I think we're probably going to see areas like Chula Vista, the Sears on Broadway that closed. We're probably going to see some housing development there. The Grossmont Center, when that sold last year, that's going to be zoned for about 60 units per acre, so we could see upwards of 3,600 units if they were to redevelop that whole site into housing down the road. You go up to the Forum at Carlsbad, there was a 15-acre parcel that, when that property was recapped, there was a 15-acre parcel that could also accommodate some housing development too. So I think we're going to see that as perhaps a wave into the future on the retail side and complementing the housing side. The industrial side is remarkable just because we are just in sort of unprecedented demand on the industrial side. You know, Amazon makes all the news. Amazon accounted for 15% of total industrial leasing activity in 2021. Biotech firms taking flex space with lab space accounted for about 18% of total leasing and velocity in 2021. That said, you look at our vacancy rate, 3.3%. Our availability rate's at about 4%. We don't have much space. You know, I was talking to Jamal earlier. You know, basically it's take it or leave it. This is what we have on the market. If you want it, take it. Otherwise, tough luck. The challenge on the industrial side right now, too, is that without very many spaces, you know, if you're a tenant that's coming out of a 5-year lease and you are paying perhaps rents about 35, 40% lower when you sign that lease, you're coming out. That's a significant amount of a new financial burden that you're going to have to commit to if you want to sign a new lease when the rents are 35, 40% higher now. You know, we're seeing a lot of the demand obviously down toward Otay Mesa, where we have sort of our logistics core, a lot of the cross-border distribution with Mexico. Seen a lot of the demand up in Torrey Pines for that lab space, Sorrento Mesa, where they're just getting tons of campuses that are being, you know, the old industrial buildings, the older office buildings that are being converted into flex properties. You know, the 56 corridor, we're starting to see a lot of conversions into flex out there as well, where we're seeing just a lot of demand. You know, and largely, you know, this slide here just basically looks at what's being built and amount of space that's that's available of what's being built. We have about 1 million square feet of industrial space that's available that's going to be new, which is probably not nearly enough to account for the demand that we've been seeing. When space delivers down in Otay Mesa, it's usually snapped up. If it's not pre-leased, it's usually leased within a month or two of delivering. Such is the nature of demand down there. Now, one of the interesting things probably on the industrial side now that's a little different, you know, obviously on the office side, you want to pre-lease your space. You want to get tenants locked in. It helps you with your pro formas. Interestingly, on the industrial side, which is a change from history, is we're seeing more brokers that are more hesitant to lease space or to pre-lease it. You know, you're locking in a lower rental rate if you pre-lease your space than with what rents are doing right now when they're rising 10% year over year. You're losing out on that rent if you're leasing it 8 months before delivery, as opposed to delivering vacant and then trying to pull in a tenant where you can lock in a higher rental rate, which is definitely a change in the industrial market, but it speaks to the demand. And you can see there's just very little industrial space across the market. We don't build the small space just basically because of, you know, higher and better use, which points to other property types. And that's why we don't see a lot of the injection of inventory that we used to see in the 70s and 80s, which were the 30, 40,000 square foot industrial facilities that are now all being repurposed into flex. On the sales side, just to give you a couple quick metrics of what we're looking when we're talking about, you know, pricing growth, industrial and apartment pricing growth is through the roof. Both are double-digit price growth over the past 12 months. And, you know, retail, office, they're still finding their legs a little bit, you know, but that speaks to the nature of demand that we looked at a lot of the slides earlier. And then cap rates, you know, we're looking at cap rates at 4% on the apartment side. You know, you still see properties trade at 6% on the office side, but now it's not uncommon, you know, which Terry could easily attest to. You're seeing properties on the apartment side, you know, a lot of coastal properties that often trade sub 4%, 3.5%, 3% cap rates, and a lot of these are value add plays. You know, and there is the eviction moratorium. Well, the eviction moratorium passed, but it's a little bit more difficult to evict tenants when you're buying properties. A lot of cash for keys proposals out there. So value add buyers can come in and turn those units over and get up to market rate on those rents. Okay, so just to wrap up with what we're looking at right here, the job market remained, you know, we had pretty good job growth in November, you know, heading into the holidays. I think we get our next job report for San Diego tomorrow, so that'll give us a good indication of where we were at the end of the year. Tons of office space leading. That's going to lead to more job growth in 2022 and 2023, which is a good thing. Retailers are regaining their footing. They're signing more leases, even though they're smaller. Logistics users and biotech users are driving demand on the industrial side. The apartment market is humming along with huge demand and rent growth. The eviction moratorium, when that sunset at the end of September, doesn't look like it's having much of an impact at all. And then there appear to be more apartment buyers and industrial buyers than there are available properties for sale right now. But we're seeing, you know, when we're seeing price growth, that people want to get into that. So with that, I thank everybody for your attention. If you have any questions, you know, here's my contact information. Please reach out to me. I'd be happy to discuss any of this stuff offline. Thanks.
Woo. Great job. Wow, such valuable information. Couldn't thank you enough for being here, Josh.